What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video from Pink Tourmaline, and this video is about suffering. It's been a little bit since I've made a video. That's because I've gone through my own period of suffering, a incident in my personal life that I'm still dealing with and still dealing with the aftermath. But when it was very close to, let's say, the moment at which this difficult period began, a few weeks ago, I was in intense suffering, and I stumbled upon this really cool video from the Next Level Soul podcast. It wasn't completely about suffering, but there was some nuggets in there about suffering that really resonated with me in the moment when I was just like overwhelmed with sadness and pain, and I was crying constantly, and it's just a really difficult period. I had another period about a year ago that, I mean, that's a whole nother thing that lasted for a very long time, almost 9 months of just constant sadness and fear and all these things. And this is actually when I stumbled upon Next Level Soul podcast, NDEs, and this entire phenomenon and this entire area of study. But you remember in these times, or at least you try to remember, and you tell yourself that through the suffering, at least on an individual level, you always seem to come out better, stronger. You level up. Obviously, it can depend on how you deal with that trauma and that difficulty. But I found that traditionally you come out with all these amazing lessons, you come out a stronger person. But I think the overarching thing that we have to remember is not only do you level up in this life and in this body and during this time period in this lifetime, but your soul is leveling up. In fact, these periods of suffering are something that we should have gratitude for. And that's what they talk about in this video. It's really hard to recognize that gratitude in the moment, but it's worthwhile to give it a shot. So anyways, hopefully this video, if you are going through a difficult period right now as well, you're going through some suffering and some pain, maybe this video will lighten your day and will give you a new perspective and a new way to think about the particular difficulty that you're dealing with. And look, hey, maybe something with such great gravity that I've never experienced and I can't exactly relate to it, but we've all suffered, we've all felt pain, and hopefully this will give you something to think about. So who we're going to showcase today in this video, the guest on the Next Level Soul podcast, is a gentleman named Daniel Joseph Gobbin. He's a spiritual author and researcher of truth who teaches the mystical wisdom of his master, focusing on humanity's spiritual evolution, reincarnation, and the nature of reality, popularized through his whale series books like You Are the Whale, presenting experiential knowledge from decades of study and practice in Eastern and Western mysticism. So again, these are just going to be two short excerpts from this interview that have to do with this idea of suffering. And again, I stumbled upon it during a time of, like I said, I'm still in the throes of dealing with some emotional trauma, but it was really, really bad. When I first saw this video, I couldn't do anything. I was just so upset and beside myself. And I saw this, and it resonated with me, even though some of these messages are things that I already felt and believed and knew, but it resonated with me. So I wanted to share it. Here we go. Here's them talking about suffering and the power of suffering.
There's a concept that suffering is necessary for awakening.
Mm.
Is that an illusion of the lower self, or is that true that there has to be a certain amount of suffering to awaken?
I think it's true. I think it is true. But,
Why?
because we got to wake up. We're in this dream. It's like somebody slapping you in the face. Wake up, snap out of it. Life does that to you, especially when you get stuck, right? Something will come along and it'll smack you and shake you. And you start to, well, what was that? Why am I doing that? So suffering really serves to help wake up the person if, and only if, they respond to it correctly. And if they, oh, poor me, oh, I'm a victim again, they lose right that one.
And they're going to have to go through it again.
This is that concept of victim mode. I made another video about this as well. Again, it's how you interpret it and react and respond to it. And even if you might have that initial victim mentality, hopefully eventually you'll toughen up and you'll use it to build your resilience and to move forward and to progress and grow. But I do think I found in my own personal experience that these periods of suffering, whether it's from a breakup, whether it's from something else, family member getting ill, whatever it is, these moments cause you deep reflection. It's like sometimes when you go lengthy periods of time without something to shock the system, which has happened to me, where you're just kind of having fun for a long time and skating by and just enjoying life. Sometimes life can feel a little bit like a dream, in fact. And that snaps you back into reality and be like, whoa, 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 whoa. This is real. This is a real tangible experience. And it grounds you in a weird way. And then you have that opportunity to reflect, to maybe change trajectory. Maybe it's a sign from your guardians or whoever it is that something needs to shift in your life. It wakes you up and can be the catalyst for a new you and a beautiful you. But more importantly, I think a new soul, a new level of vibration, whatever you want to call it, a bit of a spiritual awakening. So there's a lot of positivity to be taken, I think, in general, from these periods of suffering, these periods of difficulty where you feel that negativity. And I know I've experienced that myself, and I've experienced pretty much every time after the fact, you look back on it with gratitude and be like, man, I'm really glad that thing happened to me because I grew so much from it. I mean, it's harder to say with some really tragic, horrible things that can happen to people. Of course, that's a whole nother story to say in this life. But I imagine from what they're saying, once we pass on, once we move on, those things we can look back and say, hey, it was actually a positive once we're back in the ethereal and out of this realm. There's one other clip that I wanted to share as well, which I thought was pretty powerful. The quote is, if we knew what suffering does for us, and then I'm going to let this gentleman finish that quote, but I thought this was pretty powerful as well.
It's cold. It's nothing but suffering in the real world. When he awakens to what the reality and the truth is, it's all pure suffering until he learns to transcend it. And then he becomes an awakened one. He becomes a master.
By the way, he's talking about Neo in the movie The Matrix, which is a movie that I love, and apparently he loves it as well. But that's what he's talking about. He's talking about The Matrix and Neo, and when he goes through the period of suffering and then awakens, and then he can harness the power both in the Matrix and outside, etc.
Eventually, where he can then control both worlds. He can go into the Matrix and play with it and manipulate it. And then he starts to be able to do that in the real world as well. So it's such I don't want to go down a Matrix rabbit hole because I could talk about Matrix for hours and hours. But does that make sense as far as what we're talking about?
I'd say sure. And there's some master, it might have even been Christ, but I can't say for sure, who said, if you knew what your suffering did for you, you would pray that it never stopped.
Oh, what?
It's a heavy.
Right. That is a crazy thought, because usually when we're in the throes of that pain, I mean, I can tell you firsthand, when you're in it, you're just like, oh my God, I want it to stop. I did do a good job, I think, this time, by the way. This is a new time in my life for me where I'm alcohol free. I'm pretty much free of everything. I actually just quit caffeine as well. And I just let myself sit in it and live in it and just experience it and let my body react and cry as need be. When it comes up, I don't run from it like I used to in the past. But even that being said, you're kind of throughout that period, even if you're accepting what's happening, you're open for it to eventually at least diminish or at least come to a close. It's very uncomfortable being in those situations. So it's very much easier said than done. But I do believe absolutely in what he's saying. Can't confirm it 100%, but I totally believe, I feel that deep down in my soul. And I always feel that in retrospect, after I move past that period of extreme sorrow, extreme sadness, extreme pain, and I look back on it with great positivity as a moment that hopefully I capitalized on to grow and become not only a better person in this life, but just a better spiritual entity forever and beyond, if that makes sense. So anyways, there's the video. If you are going through a period of suffering, I hope this video resonates with you, and I hope it brightens your day as it did mine when I was in that really intense portion of the suffering. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you guys so much for joining, and we'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.